Tonight, a war was declared over, but not quite finished. President Donald Trump says the conflict with Iran has terminated. A ceasefire is in place. Diplomacy, we are told, is back on track. But the reality on the ground tells a different story. US forces are not withdrawing. Military options are still being reviewed. Negotiations are advancing, yet already facing rejection. And in one of the world's most strategic choke points, the Strait of Hormuz, pressure has not eased. So what exactly has ended? Is this truly the conclusion of a war or the beginning of a more ambiguous phase where conflict continues without being named? We break this down with our guests in just a moment. So before starting our discussion, let's watch this report made by our own colleague, Nabil Khazini.
There is a little sign at this stage of a shift in the direction of the confrontation between Washington and Tehran. Instead, what continues seems to be a series of exchanges that suggest contact but not convergence.
In the home of
This was made clear by the US president when he stated that Washington will not step back early from Iran, a position that signals continuity rather than adjustment in the US approach.
they're not coming through with the kind of deal that we have to have, and we're going to get this thing done properly. We're not going to leave early and then have the problem arise in 3 more years.
That message arrives alongside a new Iranian proposal, passed into an already fragile and slow-moving talks between the two sides. It is framed as an attempt to reopen space for diplomacy after months of escalation. But the response from Washington has been limited.
They want to make a deal, but
Donald Trump said he was not satisfied, leaving the substance of the proposal unaddressed, but indicating it falls short of US expectations. From Tehran's perspective, this is not unfamiliar ground. Officials there describe the process as one shaped by a long history of mistrust and recent conflict, where every exchange is filtered through past experience. Their criticism centers on the belief that Washington does not engage on equal terms, but instead enters discussions with fixed conditions.
مشکل طرف آمریکایی این هست که همیشه
The problem with the American side is that it has always expected to impose its maximum demands during negotiations and throughout the entire diplomatic process, pushing the other side to accept them.
Still, the situation has not returned to open escalation. A ceasefire now, in its third week, remains in place but is repeatedly tested by mutual accusations. What remains unclear is whether this space is narrowing differences or simply containing them. The proposal sits within that uncertainty, present in the process, but without a defined response and without clear indication of what comes next.
So to talk more about this, we are joined via Teams from Los Angeles by Mr. Hamoud Sarhi, Professor of Political Science and Associate Dean of the University of California. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Sarhi. He is gonna be with us in just a few moments. So the news today are the new proposal set or given by Iran to the US to negotiate a final end to the war in the Middle East. According to Iranian state media, the proposal was delivered on Thursday night with Pakistan acting as mediator, but no details about what's in the proposal were given yet. So a previous round of talks in Islamabad failed to reach an agreement. Everyone is waiting to see if there is going to be another round of negotiations or another track and another way out from this conflict that has been going on for now 60 days. And so Iran's foreign minister held talks with counterparts in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, Iraq, and Azerbaijan to discuss efforts to end the war. Pakistan is still playing the role of mediation, and they reported that the mediators in Pakistan are expected to or expect a new response from the parties involved as efforts continue to revive the awaited negotiations to see what is next in this conflict that has now been going on again since 60 days. Sources also noted signs of some progress, though uncertainty remains about the final outcome of all of these efforts. We have also seen Iran's judiciary chief Ghulam Hussein saying that Tehran remains open to talks with the United States, but they will not accept policies imposed under threat. They are ready to talk, but they do not want anything to be imposed on them. We saw today as well the American part saying that the new proposal that Iran submitted for negotiations between Tehran and Washington is not good. We heard Trump saying he was not satisfied. Speaking to reporters at the White House on Friday, he said he is unhappy with what Iran has offered so far. We don't know yet about what is in the new peace plan. There is no detail yet, but we will probably see this. The US president said he was unhappy about this. And so to talk a little bit about this, Mr. Salhi, are you with us?
Oh, hi, Miriam, I am.
Perfect. It's good to have you back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we were summarizing what happened today. We've seen that President Donald Trump said that the war with Iran has terminated. So exactly as the War Powers Act deadline arrived today, 60 days after the war. But at the same time, he insists the United States will not leave Iran early, warning that the problem could reappear. While U.S. forces remain deployed, Mr. Salhi, and tensions persist around the Strait of Hormuz. So how do we reconcile these two positions? Can a war be declared over and terminated if military presence continues and withdrawal is ruled out?
Well, the message about the war being terminated is specifically designed or aimed at members of the Congress. The War Power Resolution Act stipulates very clearly that beyond the 60-day United States being involved in a conflict that is pose an imminent danger to the national security of the country, the president must inform to get an extension or stop the conflict altogether. In other words, withdraw. Obviously, the United States is still there. So what President Trump is doing is telling members of the Congress that the war actually is no longer there because we are no longer involved in a conflict. Additionally, his defense secretary specifically stated that the 60 days do not include the period of so-called ceasefire, meaning when the ceasefire started, that's when the conflict stopped. So it's a huge controversy. It is likely that the Democrats will continue to push for this, but that's the reason why he has that statement. The other side, Miriam, that is specifically meant to the Iranians, that they are ready and they are using all the leverage to claim or to stop Iran or get Iran to surrender.
So it is a strategy, maybe, to get them to stop the conflict. And so if the war is over, what is Washington still reviewing new military plans on Iran? We have seen some officials saying that they are considering military actions, even after it was said that the war is over.
So there is a legal argument that is sort of creating problems for President Donald Trump. which is you have to inform Congress after 60 days, or stop the war after 60 days if you have not informed Congress, and you have the possibility of 30 days. So that is the legal path, and that will continue to be a conversation. The other one is what the reality on the ground. And it is an answer also to the American public, because the American public, there are now significant members among them the Republicans, who actually want the president to start to end this war. So that is sort of the reason why he's doing this. In the meantime, he knows very well that the only way that he could sort of put pressure on the Iranian by projecting the idea that we are ready to fight, and this is not, we are ready to fight, and Iran has to sort of obey or surrender. And again, remember, we have negotiations or so-called negotiations that are continuing, or messages being sent between the two parties. So it's for public relationships, public relations, but more so also to send signals to the Iranians that even though I said the war is terminated, that is not the case. We'll continue to get more troops on the ground, and we are ready to fight and to take partially even with some of Hormuz Strait.
At the same time, as you said and you just mentioned, we're still seeing movement on the diplomatic front. Tehran has submitted on Thursday night a new proposal. Mediators are expecting a response. We have seen that Pakistan said that, and yet President Trump says he's not satisfied with the plan. So are we witnessing genuine diplomacy here, or negotiations are still designed to buy some time while pressure continues? We have been asking this question for now a long time.
Very, very good question. And nobody knows except President Donald Trump. But what we are seeing is diplomatic sort of maneuvers. We seem to be arriving at somewhat a resolution that could send some kind of getting everybody wins something. But the reality is that the Iranians have a little bit moved away, not much, with the idea that we are going to do this three steps. One is, and again, this varies from one account to another, is that we have to, we are going to open the Strait of Hormuz, and provided that the Americans lift the blockade. And then the second phase will be to negotiate the end of war and completely and guarantees. And then we move to the third part, which is the negotiation over the nuclear issue. What Trump is saying, or the current administration is saying, is that no nuclear negotiations and nuclear power of Iran should be at the front, and it is at the front. This is what they are posing, and it could be, and it should be for the exchange of opening the Strait of Hormuz. That's where we are. A possibility they might get to some kind of an agreement, some kind of a resolution, but at this point, both parties are still not at the maximalist level that we've seen before, an inch perhaps closer than it was weeks ago.
So Iran is saying it is open to talks, but also rejects what it calls the dictates from Washington. Trump is unhappy with the peace proposal once again, but there might be, after all, some sort of an opening for a compromise, maybe.
And the compromise could be, Miriam, in the order maybe of the topics. The Iranians appear to want to negotiate some kind of a plan or an agreement whereby they could get the Strait of Hormuz open for some guarantees. They could also, they have already not mentioned the, lifting the sanctions. So there could be some kind of compromise in that area, but the Iranians are showing more flexibility than the Americans for obvious reasons. President Donald Trump thinks that he has the upper hand, that he would drive the Iranians to surrender by putting more sanctions, as they did. The Secretary of Treasury today announced new sanctions against Iran. That's the plan. But reality is that the American public is getting frustrated. The oil prices are continuing to increase. Yes. And that is sort of the problem for the current American administration.
Maybe speaking about the American administration, more specifically about some constitutional questions, we have mentioned the act. Now, beyond the battlefield and diplomacy, there is this legal dimension that maybe should be discussed today. So President Trump told the Congress that the ceasefire means he doesn't need their approval for a military action. That was the excuse, even as the war powers deadline arrived. So is the administration effectively redefining what counts as a war to bypass Congress?
Yeah, and that's really, American presidents have been very strong in their opposition to putting limits on their executive power. Remember, George W. Bush launched the war in Iran against Iraq without a declaration from Congress, and he was there for quite some time. President Donald Trump is doing is the same thing. It's a sensitive issue. The fact of the matter is that there is a serious problem for the Democrats or the Republican. There has to be a balance between applying the law. In this case, perhaps the President Donald Trump asking for a 30-day extension, which is possible, but that poses also a problem that he has to show that there is an imminent threat against the American national interest. So far, the nuclear issue has been the reason. But at the same time, the Democrats cannot push further because it could put them in a situation where they are putting strength on the president's ability to conduct foreign policy at a time where there is, according to President Donald Trump, a threat against national interests of the United States. So it's a very, very difficult situation. I think in the end, this will be just going in the media, and it will be like sort of a public relation headache. But when you add it to the increase of prices, when you add it to the oil prices and fertilizer and now the airline prices and all of that, that could be a very, very a serious problem for the President Donald Trump.
That could be a serious problem. Maybe back to your point on the balance between the executive and the legislative powers in the U.S. Donald Trump has described the 60-day war powers deadline as unconstitutional. He also said that other presidents dismissed it. So can we say that this marks a turning point in the balance of power between the executive and the legislative branches in the United States?
I'm not sure if the label unconstitutional fits because it's a bill that passed by the United States and by the United States Congress, and that makes it a binding law that is within the constitutional framework of the United States. But the other issue, he could be right in a sense that when you look at, for example, how presidents in the past in the United States use this, informing Congress. In all cases, starting from 1973, in all interventions that the American presidents led in foreign countries, including Panama, Nicaragua, Ronald Reagan, for example, and later on George W. Bush and others would send a letter to the Congress, to few members, by the way. He only needed to inform few members. And in that letter, they all began their letter by stating, in my capacity, in my desire to inform Congress, I decided to do this and that. So in other words, they don't give up their executive powers. What Donald Trump is doing is taking that further by saying, well, this is unconstitutional, and that is debatable. And knowing how President Donald Trump worked with the media, this is really to shift the attention to another matter, which is the constitutionality of the War Power Resolution Act, and not the executive or the Congress demanding with a bill that he needs to inform Congress. So that also is another reason, perhaps, that's why he's using the lack of. I mean, it's not. He's saying it's unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm. In that very same context, are we seeing a broader pattern where Congress is increasingly sidelined in decisions of war and peace?
Big time. I mean, what we're seeing is that the legislature has failed the American people on many faces. All the conflict that the United States has seen in the recent decades have been at the expense of Congress. President George W. Bush, for example, used the Article 2 of the Constitution, which makes him the commander-in-chief, as a reason to engage in the war in Iraq, and use that as constitutional rights for him to use. And the point he makes, his legal counselor made, is that I cannot be a commander-in-chief and not having the means and ability and weapons in this case to use. Therefore, I am using that power, and I'm taking this decision within my rights as an executive power. The second thing is that historically, it was expected that the Senate play a major role in American foreign policy, and that they will be guiding the executive because the members of the Senate are elected for 4 years, so they have time not to worry about public pressure elections. The House, however, is only 2 years. So their time will be spent about, settle down and they're running for another term. And that's sort of what it did, is that what happened historically is the Senate is the weakest branch in Congress. And those are factors that undermined the Congress, plus the failure of Congress to deliver on many issues, particularly in areas of economic growth and things like that.
But how much of what we're seeing is actually driven by domestic political considerations rather than strategic necessity?
Well, at this point, I think the issue is how much of this war that the United States needed or had, or how much of the threat was against the United States. We all know that the narrative in American media and in the public that this is a war by choice. And some go further, the vast majority, in fact, go further. This is a war for Israel, and Israel that has been dictating it. So from that perspective, the perception that this war is not needed is really very serious. But until it hurts the American deeper than it is now, we start to see the effect of oil prices, people driving, looking for ways for alternative means of transportation. Some reports today on a major network find out that the Americans are looking for alternative ways to save. They're cutting vacations and things like that. So those are patterns that could have negative impact and perhaps will also have a huge impact on the upcoming elections. So it's a serious issue. But the American people over the years have come to trust their presidents, the executive. That was stronger before the Vietnam War. It starts to decline. This is why we had the War Power Resolution Act. But in recent decades, with America's intervention in Serbia, the other intervention in Libya, all sort of added to this idea that foreign policy has not seen a lot of effects on American public. It takes time for that to happen, as we have seen in Iraq, for example.
It takes time to happen. Thank you very much, Mr. Hamoud Salhi, for joining us tonight, and it's great to have you back on our show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Mariam. Good luck.
It's our pleasure, and thank you, viewers, for following tonight's edition, and see you in our next ones.